Resolve began its life purely as a color grading tool. It's been trusted to grade some of the biggest blockbusters to come out of Hollywood. In this survival guide, we'll focus on Resolve's color page and how to put all its tools and scopes to good use on your next project. Two things before we kick off. First, you'll want to remove any LUT bias on your clips using the color management options in project settings. Watch our video on Resolve as a DI pipeline tool for more information. Second, you want to be working with an edited timeline, whether that edit occurred in Resolve or was conformed in Resolve from another nonlinear editor via EDL or XML. With the timeline selected, switch over to the color page. You'll see a timeline strip laying out all the clips in your timeline. There are no second-class citizens here, since color work needs to be done to every clip, no matter how long it spends on screen. Each clip is given the same sized thumbnail. While you're working, you can toggle between several different display modes via the Workspace Viewer Mode menu options, or the keyboard shortcuts listed next to them. Press Escape to exit the Cinema Viewer full screen mode. If you're doing any serious color correction, you'll be working with a dedicated color-calibrated external monitor, so the standard viewer layout will provide you with the most useful information. Okay, let's start by selecting a timeline clip to color correct. If you press play, you'll see that the viewer plays through the clip, but when it reaches the end, it jumps to the next clip in the timeline. Now that's helpful when you want to compare color in context with neighboring edits, but it can get frustrating when you're just focused on correcting the clip you're on. Instead, select the loop button and the playback will loop back to the start of the clip instead of advancing to the next. Drag the playhead to select a good representative frame from the clip for color correction. All the color controls appear in the lower portion of the interface. They're divided into three sections. The leftmost section offers your primary grading controls. You can switch between a few functions here: camera raw override settings, color chart matching, the standard color wheels, RGB levels, and the motion effects tools primarily available in the studio version of Resolve. Let's focus on the color wheels. Remember, this is a survival guide, not a 12-hour course on the art and science of color, so we'll show you here a reliable workflow for color grading, though of course there are a myriad of other options and features for color work in Resolve. We can't get to them all. Contrary to the impression you might get from walking past a color grading bay, color correction isn't just about moving balls around until things look pretty. There is a basic methodology, and it goes something like this. Step 1. Create a neutral grade. Step 2, create a stylized look. And then step 3, apply local color correction to specific elements in the frame, a process commonly called secondary color correction. Step 4 is to adjust the shot for delivery requirements. While these are the basic steps, they don't always occur in that order. You might more often perform secondary color correction before building your stylized grade, and in general, there's a whole lot of back and forth. But we'll go through each step right now to see how things come together. Let's start with the neutral grade. Make sure the lower left pane is showing the color wheels. If not, click the wheel icon to jump there, and then make sure the sub-selection menu is set to primaries wheels. At the lower right, make sure you're looking at the scopes by clicking this icon, and that the sub-selection menu is set to parade. Parade scopes are the best all-round scopes to use while you make general color corrections. To create a neutral grade, we want our blacks to look black and our whites to look white. Not dark blue blacks and not eggshell whites. Pure black, pure white. For a black to be pure, its red, green, and blue levels should be identical. Likewise for a pure white. We'll start by neutralizing the blacks. If you don't have any kind of leader card in your shot, try to identify an object in your scene that's a genuine black. The darkest part of this shot is the girl's blue shirt. Now, we don't want to neutralize that, or we'll turn her shirt from blue to gray. Fortunately, we do have a leader reference in the slate at the start of the take. We'll use that. The parade scopes show the intensity of red, green, and blue for a given horizontal position in the image. Pixels on the left side of the viewer are represented by the left side of the parade graph. Pixels on the right side of the viewer, the right side of the parade graph. So then, identify where in the graph your black object appears. The lowest traces on the graph at that position should represent your black object. If your blacks have a non-neutral tint, the red, green, and blue scopes will show different levels. Start by dragging left and right on the Lift master wheel. That's the thumb wheel control below the color wheel. Stop adjusting when the lowest of red, green, or blue for your black object rests at 0 on the scopes. Now adjust the Lift color wheel to neutralize the color cast. If the red is too high, drag the puck at the center of the wheel away from the reds. If the green's too high, drag away from the greens. If you go too far, just drag back in the other direction. Once all 3 scopes are level for the region representing your black object, make a final adjustment of the master wheel control to position them all solidly at the 0 level. Now it's time for the white point, using the gain controls. Identify a white point in the shot. Try to avoid super brights like specular highlights or light sources. Instead, choose a diffuse white like a white t-shirt, a white billboard, or a sheet of paper. Adjust the gain master wheel until the highest of red, green, or blue for the region representing your white object appears at the 1023 point. Repeat the color cast adjustment we did for the blacks, this time adjusting the gain wheel until red, green, and blue are even. Now, the white point will usually not be the brightest thing in the scene. As mentioned a little earlier, there may be other brighter elements like specular highlights or light sources. In this shot, it's the light streaming in through the window. To retain the dynamic range in these super bright elements, it makes sense to pull down our gain master wheel so that the super brights aren't clipped. Of course, if they were clipped when captured by the camera, there's not much you can do to salvage them in Resolve. We just want to avoid additional clipping by setting our white point too high. You can also adjust the black point a little if needed. Here, the blues of the girl's shirt are being crushed a little. With the black and white levels set and neutralized, it's time to adjust the overall midtone contrast. Drag the gamma master wheel to create a natural, even distribution of contrast from dark to light. Now, if there are some obvious mid-level grays in your shot, you can use them to adjust the midtone color bias in the same way we did for the blacks and whites. Let's jump back to a more representative frame. Quick word here, we're not expecting the shot to look pretty at this point. We just want a nice, neutral image with an expanded contrast. It's almost never what you'd want a final audience to see. Now, adjusting the gamma may have upset your black and white levels, so often you'll need to revise the lift and gain levels back to where they should be. There's typically a bit of back and forth between adjusting the blacks and the whites and adjusting the gamma until everything sits comfortably in its place. With your neutral grade complete, it's time to move on to the stylized look. In the upper right pane, you'll see the node editor. If not, click the node button. If that still doesn't work, you may be in enhanced viewer mode, and if that's the case, just deselect it from the workspace menu. The node editor is fairly simple to begin using, although it packs a punch once you start getting into more elaborate workflows. For now, just know that the image you're grading feeds in from the left, and the final color-corrected version pops out at the right. Right now, we have a single grade node in the node editor. That's where we just performed our neutral grade. Right-click on the node and choose Add Node, Add Serial. A new node is connected directly after the first. If you look at your color wheels, you'll see that all the pucks have snapped back to the center of the wheels. Resolve hasn't reset the neutral grade. Instead, the controls are now reflecting the state of the newly created node in the node editor. Since we haven't performed any color correction with this new node, all of the controls are centered. Now feel free to go crazy creating a stylized look for your shot. If you don't like the direction you've taken things, click the Reset button for an individual control, or click the Master Reset to nuke all the adjustments for your color wheels and start clean. Now, often you'll like the direction you've taken a shot, but want to experiment with different alternate grades. Enter Resolve's versioning system. Right-click the clip in the timeline and choose Local Versions, Create New Version. Optionally rename the version and then click OK. Resolve copies your current grade to the new version as a starting point. You can adjust the grade from there. To switch back to the previous grade, just right-click the clip again and choose Version 1 Load, or even easier, press Command B and N on a Mac, Control B and N on a PC to move forwards and backwards between the grades. Double-click the leftmost node and you'll see the controls update to reflect the color correction we created during the neutral grade. That's the power of these nodes. The output of each feeds into the next from left to right, allowing us to make significant changes to our shot with each node picking up where the last left off. Double-click the new rightmost node to return to editing that. Interested to see how far you've come? Press Command-D on a Mac or Control-D on a PC to disable the current node. You'll now see the neutral grade coming out of the first node without your new stylized grade applied. Click Command or Control-D again to re-enable your stylized grade. To toggle the entire grade on and off, press Shift-D. Okay, let's talk secondaries. Secondaries are color corrections applied to specific regions of an image. We'll look at two common ways to create secondaries: qualifiers and power windows. A qualifier, known in other packages as a keyer, isolates a portion of your image based on hue, saturation, and luminance. We start by right-clicking to add another new node to the node editor. This node will perform our secondary color correction. Click the Qualifier button to view the qualifier settings. You'll also want to make sure you're using the Qualifier tool. The viewer tools are selected at lower left. Click and drag across the region you want to color correct. As you drag across various pixels, you're qualifying them for the color correction. Notice how the hue, saturation, and luminance ranges increase as you select a greater range of pixel colors. Okay, let's stop and take a look at what we have. Click the Highlight button at the top of the viewer. The selected area remains full color and everything else turns gray. You can also toggle to look at a traditional grayscale matte by clicking this button, and this to return. You can drag again with the Qualifier tool to reselect your ranges. When you're happy that you have a good initial selection, toggle the Highlight button again. In this case, we've selected skin tone. If we go to our scopes and open the vector scope, we get a representation of where all the colors in the image fall. Notice the boxes indicating where magenta, blue, cyan, green, yellow, and red should fall. This is similar to the way the colors fall around the hue wheels. Click the Scope Settings button and enable Show 2x Zoom. Now the scopes show levels at twice their normal intensity. That will cause problems if you were using the vector scope for its original intent of balancing color bars, but thanks to digital, most of us haven't had to do that since the 90s. For color correction, the 2x makes things a little easier to follow. Also click the Show Skin Tone Indicator button, and a white line called the eye line appears in the scopes. Skin tone, regardless of race, should fall along this line. We'll start by pushing our gain control to an extreme to see how the traces should line up with the skin tone indicator eye line, and then we'll back off to perform a more subtle correction. We'll also adjust the gamma midtone color a little and increase the overall contrast in the face. Notice that the color correction is only being performed on the pixels inside our qualifier mask, even though we can't see the mask right now, except for the small thumbnail representation in the node editor. Toggle the node on and off using Command-D on a Mac or Control-D on a PC to see the difference. Here, we can clearly see that we've removed a green cast from the face. Now that we've got a color correction going that we like, we can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance ranges to fine-tune which pixels are being corrected by our secondary. Let's start by turning back on the highlight preview. Drag the numeric entry fields to adjust the center and width of each selection range and use the soft controls to ease off the end of the ranges. A good workflow is to shrink the width of the hue qualifier range, then sweep the center control until you find the center point of the area you're trying to isolate. Then expand the width again until you have good coverage. If you notice a harsh cutoff between color-corrected and uncorrected regions, you probably need to add a little softness. The effect of adjusting hue, saturation, and luminance independently can seem strange at first. Play around with a few different shots and selections, and you'll soon find you get a feel for it. A final touch is to add a little blur to the created matte. You can do this with the blur radius control. This will help fix any unpleasant borders remaining after you adjusted the soft controls on the hue, saturation, and luminance ranges. Now, for the most part, things look good. But our qualifier does pick up a lot of other areas of the frame that we didn't want color corrected by this secondary. That's where power windows come in. Click to the Windows section of the center lower pane and choose one of the shapes. The circle power window tends to work best for faces. Use the on-screen controls to adjust. Drag the center point to move the shape, the points along the blue border to resize, and the handle extending from the center point to rotate. An additional set of border points allow you to enlarge the soft fall-off edge of the shape. You can use the scroll wheel on the mouse to zoom in and out of the image, and the middle mouse button to pan when zoomed in. Click here to choose a specific zoom or to return to fit mode. The result? Your secondary color correction is now only applied within the power window. To be a little more specific, only the pixels inside the power window that fit into our hue, saturation, and luminance qualifier ranges will be corrected. To hide the on-screen controls, select Off from the Tools menu at lower left of the viewer, or just flip back to the qualifier section. With your secondary node selected, press Command-D on a Mac or Control-D on a PC to see the before and after of your work. From here you can go to town, adding additional secondaries simply by creating additional nodes in the node editor and setting up qualifiers and power windows. Often you'll only use a power window to perform a localized color correction to a specific part of the frame. Other times, you'll combine it with a qualifier as we've just seen in this shot. Quickly though, you'll hit a snag. Your actor's face is going to move in the frame and your shape will stay right where it is. Enter Resolve's world-class 3D tracker. Click over to the Tracker tab and then click the Track Forward button. Resolve's tracker locks on and tracks the face through to the end of the shot. If you didn't start the track at the very beginning of the shot, no problem. Click the previous keyframe button to jump back to the start of the track, and then click Track Reverse. Resolve's 3D tracker will do an amazing job of latching on, although it will go a little off at times, either because the perspective changed or because the track was disrupted somehow. In those cases, switch to frame mode. Now, when you adjust the on-screen controls for the shape, Resolve will keyframe it at the current frame. Move up and down the timeline in frame mode, tweaking the shape until it lines up nicely with the region you're trying to color correct throughout. Now there are plenty of other color correction tools here, including different keyers, log space correctors, and magic tools for smoothing skin tones. But this is a survival guide after all, and at this point you know your way around the color controls and how to perform fundamental primary and secondary color correction tasks. Well, okay, we will show you one more thing, since it's kind of an important tool, and that's the curves corrector. Take a look at the shot again. It's nice, but the light through the window is clipped. we actually have detail there in the roll camera file. The solution is to use the curves control to roll off the highlights, keeping some of the window detail without reducing the general surrounding highlights. Switch to the curve section. We'll click on the curve to add 2 new points. And if you accidentally create a point you don't want, just right-click it to delete. We'll now pull down the high points to roll off the super brights of the window. This reveals some of the detail that was previously clipped. Continue to adjust the points until you're happy with the roll-off. The midpoint we added helps anchor the lower pixel values, preventing them from being altered too much by our adjustment. We can even choose just to tweak the blue curve to balance out the blue bias of the daylight temperature lighting coming through the window. Of course, curves aren't just for highlights. You can use them to expand and contract contrast in very specific sections of the image's dynamic range. Now, when you're all done with your secondaries, just add one more node at the end of the line and apply a final primary correction to get your blacks and whites sitting exactly where they should be for your final output to cinema, broadcast, or the web. And with that, we're done. Go out there and make the world a more colorful place.